The city was alive that evening, humming with its usual chaos of car horns, neon signs, and voices echoing across the wide boulevards. Los Angeles was a place where dreams were constantly chasing reality, and where disappointment often walked hand in hand with ambition. For Michael Turner, a man of 31 with tired eyes and calloused hands, that evening was supposed to be the closest he would ever come to touching the dream he had carried since childhood. Michael had grown up with soccer stitched into the fabric of his life, even though in America back then, it was a sport still clawing for recognition. While his friends in high school dreamed of baseball diamonds and football fields, he chased the worn ball across patches of dry grass, kicking it against fences, imagining himself under stadium lights. He played for local clubs, always hoping someone important would notice. But his career had stalled at the semi-professional level, caught in the cruel limbo between talent and opportunity. Still, his passion never left him, and there was one player who embodied everything he longed to be: David Beckham. Beckham wasn't just a soccer star. He was proof that the game could transcend borders, that someone could carry the weight of expectation and still make the sport beautiful. Michael admired him fiercely, collected posters, taped clippings from magazines, and even tried to imitate his free-kick technique in empty parks. Beckham wasn't just an idol. He was a compass pointing Michael toward hope. So when Michael heard that Beckham was coming to Los Angeles for a promotional event, an intimate Q&A and meet and greet with fans, he felt like fate had finally thrown him a lifeline. The announcement had spread quickly. Beckham would be in the city for one evening only, speaking about his transition to Major League Soccer and inspiring young players to keep believing in their dreams. Tickets sold out instantly, but Michael stood in line for hours, securing one with the last of his paycheck. On the night of the event, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Teenagers in replica jerseys clutched Sharpies and posters, parents balanced their children on their shoulders, and reporters clustered near the front, their cameras ready. Michael had tucked away a white Manchester United shirt, frayed and yellowed with age, the same shirt Beckham had worn when he first captured the world's attention. To Michael, that shirt wasn't fabric, it was history. All he wanted was for Beckham to sign it. Just a signature, something to prove he had once touched the dream. He arrived early, but the crowd was already overwhelming. He found a seat halfway back, the shirt folded neatly in his lap, his palms sweating as the lights dimmed and a voice announced Beckham's arrival. When the man himself walked onto the stage, tall, poised, with that unmistakable calm smile, the auditorium erupted. People screamed, clapped, and lifted their phones, desperate to freeze the moment. Michael didn't scream. He couldn't. His throat tightened as if the sheer weight of the moment pressed down on him. He could only stare, his heart racing, as Beckham sat at the long table, microphones and bottled water set neatly before him. The Q&A was a blur. Beckham answered questions with practiced humility, speaking about dedication, family, and his love for the sport. Michael barely registered the words. His mind was fixed on one thing, waiting for the moment he could approach the stage. He rehearsed it in his head. He would stand tall, hold up the shirt, smile nervously but earnestly and say, "David, could you sign this for me? You've been my inspiration." It wasn't much, but it was everything to him. When the event concluded, ushers announced that a limited number of fans would be allowed near the stage for autographs. Chaos ensued. Dozens surged forward, waving memorabilia. Michael clutched his shirt and followed, pushing against the tide of eager bodies. His chest pounded with adrenaline as he got closer. Beckham was right there, just a few feet away, pen in hand, smiling as he signed a ball for a little boy. Finally, Michael reached the edge of the stage. He raised the shirt, his voice trembling but strong enough to carry over the noise. "David, could you sign this? Please, it would mean everything to me." Beckham's head turned slightly, their eyes met for the briefest second, and for that instant Michael felt seen. But then everything unraveled. A man in a headset rushed to Beckham's side, whispering urgently in his ear. Beckham's face changed, a flicker of worry crossing his calm exterior. He glanced at his watch, muttered something apologetic to the crew and stood. "Sorry, I have to go," Beckham said quickly, his accent clipped but firm, and just like that he was gone. He walked briskly toward the exit, surrounded by handlers, leaving behind a trail of disappointed fans calling his name. Michael stood frozen, the shirt still raised in his hand. The air seemed to drain from his lungs. Around him, others groaned in frustration, but they quickly shrugged it off, laughing, moving on. For them it was just bad luck. For Michael it was devastation. That look, those few seconds when Beckham's eyes met his, haunted him. To Michael it didn't feel like urgency. It felt like dismissal. It felt like the man he had worshipped for years looked right at him and decided he wasn't worth a second of his time. He lowered the shirt slowly, numb as the crowd began to thin. Alone among hundreds, he felt invisible. Something inside him cracked that night. It wasn't just the absence of an autograph. It was the shattering of an illusion, the crushing realization that maybe idols weren't what he thought they were. Michael walked out of the auditorium into the cool Los Angeles night. The neon lights blurred with the sting in his eyes. He stuffed the shirt back into his bag, but it no longer felt sacred. It felt tainted, like a cruel reminder that he had been foolish enough to believe. On the drive home, the silence in his car was deafening. He replayed the moment over and over, convincing himself it wasn't about Beckham's urgency, but about him. About how unimportant he must have looked. About how worthless his dream must have been in the eyes of someone he had given so much admiration to. That night marked the beginning of a wound that would never properly heal. Michael carried it with him, and the resentment only grew. In his mind, Beckham hadn't just walked out of a room. He had walked out of Michael's dream. And for years to come, Michael would feed that wound, until admiration turned to bitterness, and bitterness turned into a hatred that would one day erupt in a public confrontation no one could have foreseen. New York had its own rhythm. Faster, sharper, louder than Los Angeles. The city never let you hide. For Michael Turner, who was now well into his 40s, the relentless pace of New York mirrored the noise in his own head. Years had passed since that night in Los Angeles, but the wound had never closed. If anything, it had festered, growing deeper with time. Life had not been kind to him. His short-lived semi-professional career ended with an ankle injury that refused to heal properly. He bounced from one odd job to another: bartender, delivery driver, construction helper. He married once, divorced quickly, and saw his father pass away without ever hearing him say, "I'm proud of you." At every turn, disappointment seemed to shadow him. And yet, through it all, Beckham remained in his mind, not as a beacon of hope anymore, but as the ghost of betrayal. Each time Beckham's face appeared on billboards or TV commercials, Michael felt the bitterness surge. He remembered that shirt in his hands, that glance, that abrupt exit. It became symbolic of his entire life. Overlooked, dismissed, unworthy. Social media gave him an outlet. Under anonymous usernames, he left biting comments on articles about Beckham. Fraud. Doesn't care about real fans. All image, no soul. The internet was his confessional booth, his boxing ring. No one knew who he was, but each hateful word felt like a small victory, a way of clawing back dignity from a man who had taken it. Then years later came the announcement. David Beckham would appear in New York City at a high-profile community event, discussing his work in promoting soccer across America. The venue, a sleek auditorium in Manhattan filled with media, fans, and families. Beckham would sit down with young athletes, answer questions, and share his vision for the future. When Michael saw the advertisement, something inside him snapped. He felt heat surge through his chest. It wasn't enough that Beckham was adored everywhere he went. He was now being praised as a philanthropist, a community builder. To Michael, it felt like hypocrisy. How can the world celebrate him when I know the truth? When I know what he really is? The night of the event, the auditorium brimmed with excitement. Journalists clustered with cameras ready, children in soccer jerseys fidgeted with anticipation, and parents whispered proudly about the inspiration their kids would receive. On the stage, chairs and microphones were arranged neatly beneath a banner that read, "Soccer for the Next Generation." Michael entered quietly, blending into the crowd. His clothes were plain, his face weathered, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. But inside him, a storm raged. He took a seat near the middle rows, close enough to see Beckham clearly, far enough not to draw suspicion. When the lights dimmed and Beckham walked onto the stage, the auditorium erupted in cheers. He wore a dark tailored suit, his posture relaxed but polished. His smile carried that same effortless charm, the aura of someone who belonged in front of cameras. Michael's jaw tightened. The applause stabbed at him, each clap echoing like mockery. He thought of the years he had spent working meaningless jobs, his failed marriage, the nights he drank himself numb while Beckham's face graced magazine covers. The event unfolded smoothly. Beckham spoke with sincerity about his journey, the challenges of bringing soccer to mainstream America, and the importance of giving back to communities. He answered children's questions with patience, laughing warmly at their innocent remarks. The audience hung on every word. Michael's fists clenched. To him, every smile looked rehearsed, every story crafted for applause. He couldn't take it anymore. As a young boy finished asking about Beckham's favorite memory on the field, Michael shot to his feet. His voice thundered through the quiet auditorium. Favorite memory? How about the memory of abandoning your fans, huh? Do you ever talk about that, Beckham? The room froze. Heads turned sharply, whispers rippling like a sudden wind. The boy who had asked the question shrank back in his seat, confused and frightened. On stage, Beckham blinked, momentarily stunned, then leaned slightly forward as if to catch the words. Michael's face was red, veins standing out on his neck. He jabbed a finger toward the stage. Yeah, I'm talking to you. You remember Los Angeles years ago? You looked me right in the eyes while I begged you to sign my shirt, and you walked away like I was dirt under your shoes. That's who you really are. Gasps spread through the auditorium. Security guards at the edges of the room stirred, beginning to move. Phones came out, screens lighting up as people recorded the confrontation. Beckham raised a hand slightly, signaling for calm. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes carried a weight of recognition, as if he understood something more was happening than just heckling. Michael's voice grew louder, trembling with rage. You built your life on being some saint for the fans, some hero for the kids. But I know the truth. You don't care about people like me. You never did. My whole life I've carried that moment, and you just keep smiling like none of it matters. His words cracked, raw and desperate, echoing against the walls. The audience shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty to Beckham and the undeniable anguish in Michael's voice. The first guard reached the aisle near Michael, but Beckham held up his hand firmly. Please, Beckham said, his voice calm but commanding. Let him speak. The guard hesitated, then stepped back. Michael's chest heaved. He hadn't expected Beckham to allow this. For years, he had rehearsed the anger in his head, imagined shouting it into Beckham's face. But now that the moment was real, his rage mingled with a deep, painful vulnerability. Beckham leaned toward the microphone, his gaze locked on Michael. What's your name? He asked gently. Michael, the man barked. Michael Turner. Not that it matters to you. It matters, Beckham said softly. Go on, Michael. The room was utterly silent now, hundreds of eyes darting between the two men. Michael's hands shook, but he pressed forward. I was 31. I had given everything to this game. My body, my time, my dreams. I had nothing else. And I came to see you, the man I thought represented everything I loved about soccer. All I wanted was a moment, a signature, a word, anything. And you looked right at me and left. Do you know what that does to someone? Do you know how it feels to realize your hero couldn't even spare 10 seconds for you? His voice cracked, breaking under the weight of years. Tears burned his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. I carried that rejection like a curse. Every failure, every setback, I blamed on you. Because you were the proof that dreams were fake, that the people we look up to don't actually care. You destroyed that night, and I never recovered from it. The audience sat in stunned silence, some shifting uncomfortably, others visibly moved. The cameras rolled, capturing every syllable, every tremor in Michael's voice. Beckham didn't rush to respond. He inhaled slowly, his expression heavy with thought. Then, with measured calm, he leaned closer to the microphone. Michael, I remember that night. The words struck like lightning. Michael froze, the air caught in his throat. Beckham's voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the room. I remember the event in Los Angeles. I remember people asking for autographs, and I remember leaving suddenly. I didn't explain why, and I see now how much pain that caused you. Michael's face twisted, torn between disbelief and the desperate hope that Beckham might finally acknowledge the truth. Beckham continued. That night, I received a call while I was sitting at the table. My father had collapsed and was being rushed to the hospital. In that moment, I panicked. I left without thinking, without stopping, without explaining to anyone. I wasn't trying to reject you. I was just a son, desperate to get to his father. The air in the auditorium seemed to vanish. People shifted, eyes wide, whispers passing through the crowd. Michael staggered slightly as if struck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Beckham's eyes softened. I can't take back the hurt I caused you. I should have found a way to make that moment different. I should have remembered that even in my worst panic, there were people who saw me as their dream. And for failing you that night, Michael, I am truly sorry. The silence was deafening. Michael's shoulders slumped, the rage draining from his body. For years, he had carried hatred, convinced Beckham had dismissed him. And now, the truth unraveled everything. It hadn't been about him at all. He trembled, tears finally breaking free, streaking down his cheeks. The auditorium watched as the man who had interrupted so angrily now stood broken, vulnerable, stripped of the armor of hate. Beckham didn't move from his chair, but his presence filled the stage. His calm, his humility, his willingness to listen. It all clashed violently with the image Michael had built in his head. And for the first time in decades, Michael felt the weight of his resentment begin to crack. The confrontation wasn't over. The healing had only just begun. But the walls had been breached, and in that breach was something Michael hadn't felt in years: the possibility of release. The silence that followed Beckham's confession stretched long and heavy, like the still air before a summer storm. Hundreds of people in the auditorium sat frozen, holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the fragile thread that now hung between the two men. Phones continued to record, their tiny screens capturing a moment that felt more like theater than reality, except it was real, painfully real. Michael stood there trembling, his body suddenly exhausted, as though the rage that had carried him this far had burned away in an instant. For years, he had rehearsed this confrontation in his mind. He had imagined himself shouting, cutting through Beckham's polished image, exposing him as a fraud. He had dreamed of triumphing over the man who had once crushed him with a glance. But this was not part of the script. Beckham hadn't fought back. He hadn't dismissed him or mocked him. He had remembered. He had explained. He had apologized. Michael's mouth was dry, his heart thudding against his ribs. His entire body felt light, unsteady, like he might collapse where he stood. The truth rang in his ears. Beckham had left because his father was in the hospital. He hadn't abandoned Michael out of arrogance or indifference. He had been a son terrified for his parent. The words replayed in his mind over and over, tearing holes in the fortress of hatred he had built. "I wasn't trying to reject you. I was just a son, desperate to get to his father." For so long, Michael had clung to the story that Beckham didn't care, that he had looked him in the eyes and deemed him unworthy. That story had given shape to his bitterness, had justified every cruel word he typed online, every moment of self-pity, every bottle of beer cracked open to drown his disappointment. It had been his anchor, the excuse he gave for his failures. And now, in one confession, Beckham had cut the anchor loose. Michael staggered back a step, clutching the back of a chair for support. His vision blurred with tears he could no longer hold back. His chest heaved, not with rage, but with grief. Grief for the wasted years. Grief for the man he had become. Grief for the illusion that had defined him. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some felt tears sting their own eyes, moved by the raw humanity unraveling before them. Others whispered to each other, struggling to process the spectacle. A global icon confessing vulnerability, and an ordinary man breaking down under the weight of his own resentment. On stage, Beckham leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving Michael. He didn't look defensive. He didn't look annoyed. He looked human. Tired maybe. Compassionate. Present. Michael wiped at his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his own collapse. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. "All these years, I thought you didn't care. I thought I didn't matter. And he choked on the words, forcing them through tears. "I hated you for it. I hated you so much I made it my identity. You don't understand how much of my life I wasted thinking about that one moment." Beckham let the words settle before responding. His voice, though soft, carried clearly through the hushed room. "I do understand, Michael. Not your exact pain, but the way one moment can shape how you see yourself. I've lived with moments where I felt defined by one mistake, one decision, one headline. And I know how heavy that can be." Michael stared at him, blinking away tears. He wanted to protest, to say Beckham couldn't possibly understand the life of an ordinary man who had lost everything. But something in Beckham's tone stopped him. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished for the cameras. It was honest. Beckham continued, his words slow, deliberate. "That night in Los Angeles, I left without thinking of how it would look. I didn't stop to realize that for some people, that was their only chance. And I regret that. I regret the pain it caused you. I can't change the past, Michael, but I can tell you from my heart, I'm sorry." The words landed with the weight of finality, breaking through the last barrier Michael had left. His knees nearly buckled. He sank into his seat, his face buried in his hands. Sobs racked his body, years of bitterness spilling out in tears he hadn't allowed himself to cry. The audience remained utterly silent, reverent almost, as though witnessing a sacred moment. The cameras kept rolling, but no one seemed to care about virality anymore. They were watching a man unravel and another man, an icon, offering him grace. For a long time, the room stayed in that fragile stillness.